Hello malt mates, welcome to Ralphie Review 1081 extras, extra content, extra information, extra opinion, extra extras, and you're getting extra about this bottling here, which I bought at auction several years ago, and I finally got round to just opening it out of curiosity and sharing the results with you in review number 1081, which was not particularly flattering and not very kind to the bottling for a very simple reason: it's not very good. Interestingly, look at the colour. I want to start with the colour in this before I kind of give you a little bit more insight, a bit more forensics on this bottle. The colour is suspiciously dark. Is that caramel colourant? Yeah, I believe there is caramel colourant in there, but it's found its way in through this. What is this, you may ask? This is authentic, genuine 1970s Paxaret. The Paxaret is basically a sweet, spicy sherry bois, in other words, wood-infused syrup, which was pressurised into casks to rejuvenate them, to help give the whisky a finish. Already you're seeing comparisons in the 1970s as to what's happening 50 years later in 2025. Let's put the Paxaret away. There's very, very little of this stuff still around. It was issued by bottles and in other containers, sometimes in steel drums, to bottling houses to be added to the whisky with caramel or in replace of caramel, but also sent to cooperages, where the coopers would be invited to pour a litre and a half of Paxaret into the cask when they had finished servicing and rejuvenating an exhausted cask to give it a little bit more spice. It didn't really work in the 1970s. It started to become a bit embarrassing for the industry, and therefore they decided that they would simply get round it through a technicality, because that's the way business works. So they removed the word Paxaret, but quietly replaced it with sherry seasoning, sherry seasoned casks. So if you think that modern sherry casks are in any way substantially different from the old Paxaret days, think again. And furthermore, having tasted the Paxaret, it's absolutely delicious. It's a lot better than modern sherries that I've tasted. It's superior in quality. And I've tasted White and Mackay bottlings blended whisky, which has been Paxareted from the 1970s, and it was absolutely delicious. It actually worked. And here's the clue we're getting, is that when these finishes and conditionings are done properly, with good quality ingredients, then they will work. It's when you cheap out on your investment, that's when the problem begins, which is why we may see many modern brands experiencing problems at the moment. But anyway, with this forensics, I want to go a little bit further. The timeline in this, 1975, circa. Circa is a little fancy word, a legal word, saying thereabouts, right? So it's thereabouts 1975 this was produced, when we're already seeing a substantial downturn in the consumption of Scotch whisky globally, because frankly the world was in a post-war recession, and it was lingering, it was bad, and it's actually taken to 2025 for Britain to be back in as much trouble as it was at the end of the Second World War. In terms of organisation and finances, but here we are. This whisky is a curiosity. If you've got extra spending money and you're a real whisky fan, then you might want to consider this type of bottling. But please be very, very selective. Some of the bottlings out there are fabulous, particularly if they've been stored properly, and they can be humble bottles, particularly humble blends, bottles of Teachers, bottles of White Horse, bottles of White and Mackay. They're fantastic, because that's back in the age, back in the 1970s, when blends ruled the roost. And therefore good single malt whisky was put into blends to create good blends. It's what they did. And sure, the grain varieties were very different then. You got a richer yield of flavour, because they didn't have the genetic modification to increase the yield of alcohol from carbohydrates and starch. And also it was more manual in the old days. Staff were very poorly paid. Many of them were alcoholics, or some were absolutely teetotal and very Presbyterian. And that made them ideal for working at a distillery, because they were less prone to industrial injuries. And that happened a lot in the old days. We tend to sentimentalise the yesteryear of Scotch whisky, because the old newsreels suggest we do. And also the culture in the whisky scene also suggests that it's the good old days of innocence and great whisky, and it was far better then than it is now. And by the way, trust me, that's not true. It really isn't true. In fact, at this moment in time, in terms of value for money, you can go out and you can get fabulous quality of whisky, which has never been of better quality than it is now, at accessible prices. All you need to do is be careful what you buy and have the knowledge. Therefore, subscribe online. Online is where you will really find what you need to know. Simples. So it's an exotic little curiosity. It says it's a rare liqueur whisky. It's called Inverlochy Castle, and it's a Grand Reserve, and it's a fine old. So basically you can see the hyperbole happening here. So what's the circumstance that led to this? So I'm going to go back. I'm on my computer here and I'm looking back in the timeline. So we go back to where Ben Nevis Distillery started. It's one of Scotland's oldest distilleries. It was founded in 1825 by Long John Distillers, which was a prominent blend brand back in the day, highly respected. And of course, the richness of the maltiness was coming from Ben Nevis Distillery, because that's the West Coast, classic West Coast single malt character, particularly when you're right in the coastline. Jumping up far later to 1955, a Joseph Hobbs took over the distillery, who happened to be an American living in Scotland since the 1930s and thought that things were going to be on the up, and therefore invested in up to 4 different distilleries, including Bruichladdich, Lochside, now long gone, and Glenesk, now long gone. He had some moderate success because he was producing grain whisky at Ben Nevis. So he was able to produce an in-house blended malt, rich in malt, called Dew of Ben Nevis, which you can still buy today. It is of variable quality. In 1981, Ben Nevis was sold back to Long John Distillers and then continued in 1986. It was only going for 5 years before shut down again, then sold to the Japanese company Nikka, who opened it back, got producing again, and have basically milked the distillery as its owners to provide heavily malted whisky content, which they can ship over to Japan and call Japanese whisky. So in the Japanese whisky, they never mention the fact, never ever mention it, that in fact they've got Scotch whisky in their Japanese whisky, which is probably one reason why it tastes so good. And really, is there much more to know? Yeah, if you start buying books, you will find, but be careful, many writers of whisky books get their information from distilleries, and it can be anecdotal. When staff at distilleries are being asked by very well-intentioned whisky fans about the history of the distillery, they will gild the lily so to speak. They will big it up. They will tell you about, aye, hoots toots the new, the grand old days, and what characters we had, and we all had our dram on a Friday night, and then we had our spontaneous ceilidh out in the lawn behind the distillery. Don't believe a word of it. I know, coming from a Scotsman, this is going to sound quite cynical to you. And yes, it should. It doesn't do you, the whisky enthusiast, any favours whatsoever when you're getting falsified narratives coming out from the industry as regards their provenance. They feel entitled to do so because when people are visiting distillery or at whisky festivals, people are imbibing alcohol. And alcohol is a narcotic, and it makes you sentimental, it makes you imaginative, and it gives you that warm, fuzzy glow which you then associate not with the alcohol, but where the whiskey's made. And that's a trap. You better believe it. These distilleries, throughout time, have had a pretty rough journey, many of them. Because they were a business. First and foremost, they were not a charity. They were not a benevolent society to help sustain jobs in the local community. Staff would be in there working their pants off just to keep the place afloat, doing running repairs as they did because of the systematic negligence in the distillery by the owners who were looting the profits. I challenge anybody to tell me I'm wrong. There is far too much sentimentality about the past because it's very easy to recreate it in false narratives which are based on half-truths. We have to be aware of that, and never more so, malt mates, than when we're going to auction and buying from auction and we're buying historic bottles of whiskey or rum or bourbon. Please do not for 1 minute presume you're going to get a great experience, because back in the old days when people didn't have a lot of money and didn't have a lot of options and certainly didn't have the internet to inform them, people were easily getting fobbed off with inferior crap. Many rums, crap. Some bourbons, quite a few bourbons, crap. Just so long as it was palatable and you could swig it back. All they were concerned about was getting the spirit out as young as possible. And I'm just reminding you, don't get too sentimental. And finally, beware of bidding wars. It's something that comes with experience. If you're going to auction, you will make the mistake of getting wound up because someone else is outbidding you on the bottle that you feel, because of the attention you've been paying to it, you've already as good as bought it. And you start pressing the button. It's one button away. Click, click, bid, 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 bid. Before you know it, 3 or 4 clicks, you've doubled the price that you originally tended to pay. Let me give you some practical advice. Let it go. Wait to the next auction or the auction afterwards. You will get what you're looking for at the price you expect to pay. It is a frequent occurrence that bidders will come in, see something and grossly overpay, simply because they're determined to have that bottle, that one bottle, that only bottle, because they want it as part of their collection and their bragging rights, and they want to open it with friends and have the glow effect. I hope this helps you. There's not a lot of in-depth whisky information on the internet. You will find it in books. There are plenty of books to choose from. And there's more being published on a regular basis. It's one of these things that the publishers like to have under the food and drink banner. So as long as they kind of have this cycle of different colour, different cover, different author, different sort of take, but roughly the same information. It kind of gets passed on from book to book, but unfortunately, as it does, so does misinformation. I'm going to tell you something that you really won't hear much about, and that is the fact that historically there wasn't a lot of respect by the owners for the distilleries. I mean, there really wasn't. It was needed in the community, particularly rural communities. They've always been important to Scotland, but that doesn't mean to say that it doesn't get neglected. And it certainly the industry gets neglected by the sheer greed of the Crown in applying HMRC customs and excise duty, which is purely royal tax, on the product, and to basically siphon the wealth away from the businesses into government, no, not even government, into state pockets. It's always been that way, and frankly always will. The history of the Scotch whisky distilleries are very similar to the rum distilleries. There were many of them. They never survived. They got scooped up or just shut down and burnt down for insurance claims, and barrels of whisky would just disappear forever. This is what happened. I know for a fact that back in the old days that staff, if they really felt aggrieved, they'd come to an arrangement with friends to uncover a cask of whisky from out with a warehouse, and they'd take it away down to Edinburgh and Glasgow and sell it to a bar who was more than happy to have the quality of the malt whisky, which they'd blend themselves at the bar, and all free of duty, all free of customs excise. Britain has a very big history of community resistance to excessive taxes by the authorities. And you see this in the fascinating smuggling stories and history all round the coast of Britain. And living on an island myself, I'm very much aware of it. A precursor to the drugs trade now, which is essentially a smuggling business. It's hugely smuggling, and avoiding attention, avoiding duty, avoiding accountability. And there was many during the smuggling. There was many a good liquor cut to within an inch of its life, with vinegars and fusile liquors and cheapest brandies, particularly rum. Rum was often just dressed up with sugar. The sweeter the rum, the sweeter the palate. And it was rough. It was rougher than it is now. And it's rough enough for businesses. As customers, as whisky fans, we tend to sentimentalise. We really do. And we've got to caution ourselves. We're dealing with businesses. And we can get friendly with the people at the distillery. But that friendship, by the way, don't you forget it, is highly conditional. And the condition is you remain a customer and you remain complimenting the brand. Just go to Fee Seal and you'll see it happening constantly. Or the Speyside Whisky Festival. That's really all I have to say in this review. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.